We are going to talk about custom preflight reports in pdfToolbox this session. And I have a bit of a presentation because I wanted to explain some of the underlying logic. It is one of those topics that we have talked about before, but I think that there are relatively few people who have actually made one themselves, even though it is a great tool if you want to communicate to customers. And not just customers, if you want to communicate internally, it can make your life a lot easier as well. So there is value in understanding how this works. So this will all be about preflighting a PDF file, getting preflight errors and warnings and so on. And then how do you communicate that to other people? So presentation first of all, and then I would like to swap to pdfToolbox and show some of these things in pdfToolbox. If you have questions, it's only going to get more interesting if you ask them. Yeah. You will see that I have a huge monitor, and I haven't figured out on this one yet how I can make it smaller so that it's easy in the Zoom. So it might be big, and well, I'll see if I can zoom in where relevant. So let's get started. We're going to talk, or I want to talk anyway, about preflight reports, about some of the architecture, and then, like I said, I want to look at this in pdfToolbox desktop as well. Of course, I'm going to show some things in pdfToolbox desktop. This is not limited to the desktop. You create reports in the desktop, you will test them in the desktop, but just as anything else in pdfToolbox, once you have created the custom report, you can use it in the automated versions, whether it's the server or the CLI or integrated into Switch. You can reuse them as you would in the desktop itself. This is me. Well, at least that's my name. Most of you, I think, will know me by now, but a short introduction. I am the CTO of Four Pees, which means that I do all kinds of things, usually complex and having to do with technical stuff, but I will have opinions about sales and marketing and all kinds of other things, including penguins as well. So I have, I'm afraid to say I have about 25 years of experience by now in graphic arts. Starting from Focus and Pitstop through Gradual Software and Switch, and like I said, now 4Ps and a whole range of different solutions that have to do with graphic arts. So let's look at preflight reports. What is a preflight report? I think that is pretty obvious, but sometimes it's good to state the obvious as well. pdfToolbox makes it possible for you to preflight documents. The result of that is a list of what is potentially wrong with the document. So the result of a preflight step is a list of errors that were found, warning messages if there are any, informational messages if there are any, and a list of all the things that were corrected in the document during this preflight step. And all of those are optional. If the document is good, you won't have any errors. You don't have to fix anything, so there might not be any correction messages in there. But all of these things happen during preflight, and then preflight reports is what you use to communicate that back to the next step in the chain. And that could be through an HTML report. It could be through a predefined PDF report, which is one that you cannot modify. It looks a certain way and you can't modify it. It could be through XML if the next step is an automated process and you want to interpret the results of preflight in an automated fashion. Or it can be a custom PDF if you want to modify how exactly you are going to communicate to your to the client and what exactly you want to say. Custom PDF is what got added to pdfToolbox last. The other things were already there. It got added last. It also got added with very, very flexible new technology, and that is what we're going to focus on today. This is how it looks out of the box. So if you install pdfToolbox and you start preflighting and you create a custom PDF report, then this is what you are going to get. It looks pretty clean. It looks, it's actually more concise than the predefined PDF report. It was also designed by a creative person rather than an engineer, so it looks a little bit better. Sorry to the engineers. But this is what you get out of the box. And you can see that in this case, there are no error messages, no informational messages. There are a bunch of warnings, and you can see what the warning is. And the rest of the document would then contain more information about the document itself and where it was pre-flighted and by whom and so on. Why would you want to customize that? I think it makes sense to ask that question as well, because that's mostly the business case. And I think people sometimes don't think about creating custom reports because they can't imagine why they would need them. Well, the obvious reason and the easy one is to change the branding. If you look at what pdfToolbox does out of the box, that is Callas branded. There is a pdfToolbox logo on there. There is a Callas logo on there. It uses Callas red and so on. And of course, if you pre-flight, for example, you have a portal and clients can upload files and then they get results back, it could make sense to modify that and to do something that matches your company style. And that is relatively easy to do, and it can already add quite a bit of value. So that's an obvious one. The second one that is already, all the others are a lot less done actually in practice, which is a shame. But the second thing that you can do is to remove useless information. And I've defined that there because apparently it's not always clear to people. But to me, useless information means anything that your customer either doesn't need to see or will not understand when you show it to them. Yeah? And what is useless in your context might depend on the workflow that you are in, the type of company you are, the type of customers that you're talking to. If you know that it is going to confuse customers to see that you have corrected things in their PDF document, while you know very well that all the things that you correct are not dangerous and they should be done anyway, then it might be worthwhile to remove the section about the corrections, about the fix-ups in that pre-flight profile and not show it. That is possible. The custom pre-flight report template allows you to modify those kinds of things. So you could remove a whole section. I could remove only a few things that are too technical or too difficult as well. I can also add missing information. Again, something that is not done very often, but that is often useful. For example, I could show the number of pages in the document, or I could take it one step further and show which pages are A4 and which pages are something else. Yeah. I could show how many portrait or landscape pages there are. I could show whether the whole document has the same orientation or not, and so on. In essence, you can add anything that you want to a pre-flight report. Of course, you're limited to information you already have or information that you can get from the pre-flight process. And we'll say a few more things when I start looking at the examples. Next thing that you can do is rephrase information. Maybe the information that is there is actually useful, but it's so technical that your client doesn't understand what you're talking about. And the pre-flight report template allows you to modify how things are said, so you can do that as well. And then the last thing that you can see here, you can also specialize it for a given purpose. And this could be different things. I'm going to show a few examples of using a specific template if you know something about the document. If I know that all my documents are 2 pages, for example, because it's business cards and I have a front and a back for all of these business cards, then I could create a template that not only shows me the first page as a little preview, but shows me both next to each other. That is specialization specifically for a particular product. I could also specialize it for a given purpose. If I have a pre-flight report and I'm going to show it to salespeople and I'm going to show it to pre-press people, then maybe it makes sense to have a different template for the pre-press people than for the salespeople. They might not want to see the same information. You might want to change the order of some of the information in there so that they immediately see what is interesting for them. And that is definitely also something that you can do. Good. So enough reasons to want to change it. And then the next question is, how do you go about changing that? And then we need to look at how was this implemented in pdfToolbox. This feature goes back quite a while, by the way. I think in preparation for this, I looked at when we introduced this, and I think the custom pre-flight reports go back to pdfToolbox 7. Given that we're now at version 12, this is about five to 6 years ago, probably. And it was the first instance of Callas using HTML technology or HTML-based technology in pdfToolbox. So what they did at the time was look at, okay, how are we going to implement a pre-flight report that people can modify? They could have come up with a new language or something that uses limited templates or anything like that. And the decision then was made to not do that and to make it as flexible as possible. In order to do that, they used HTML. So basically, inside of pdfToolbox, you have an HTML parser, WebKit-based HTML engine. And that means that the pre-flight report template is just an HTML file. And because it's an HTML file, and because you're using WebKit, which was at one point the underlying technology for things like Safari, you have a full HTML engine, and that means you can also use CSS for styling. You can integrate JavaScript to do calculations and do conditional stuff and so on. In essence, everything that you could do on a website. The downside from that is that the learning curve is relatively steep. This is web-based technology. So if you've made websites in your past or current life, then it's not terribly difficult. You just need to figure out what is different in this implementation. If you've never done anything with HTML and CSS or JavaScript, then yes, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. Learning all these things, because you have to understand all of them at the same time, can be a bit of a challenge to get started with. So how does this work in pdfToolbox? And I have a few more advanced things, 2 slides further, I think. But in essence, pdfToolbox does a pre-flight, and it is then going to inject information from this pre-flight into the template that you have. And that allows the template to modify the HTML file that it's working with, insert error messages, for example, or anything that you want to modify or make conditional to work through all of that. And then pdfToolbox converts the HTML into a PDF report. So it really goes into steps. You first have the pre-flight, then you have the information that comes from the pre-flight that is inserted into your template. And then from there, a proper PDF file is created. So what does a template look like? And I will show you the actual thing in a second as well. But there are a few very important items. In essence, a template can be very small. Most of them are not. Well, at least not if you start from what we have as examples, because there is already a lot of support stuff there that we give you, so that it isn't all that difficult to do things, but they can be relatively small. And the things that you see on this slide are the things that are required. The first thing is a manifest.xml file. This is a communication file between pdfToolbox and your template, or vice versa would be a better way of putting it. Basically, the manifest.xml tells pdfToolbox what it is that you need in terms of information. Some of the information you will always get, like the basic preflight results, but some of the information that you could get takes a lot of time to prepare. And if you just want to make a basic preflight report, and you don't need ink coverage information, for example, because you don't show that in the preflight report anyway, then there is no point in generating it. And this manifest.xml file allows you to state to pdfToolbox which of that more advanced information you're going to need in your template. So it's important. The next bit is essentially the HTML file that is going to be converted. And this could be a completely static file, but then of course you're not going to see much preflight information because it's a static HTML file. So typically what happens is that you have an HTML file there that already contains a lot of the background that you want in your report, and already contains templates for how things should look, for example, and then some JavaScript will insert the preflight information that comes back from pdfToolbox. I'm listing only the index.html file. In real life, typically it is an HTML file and then a bunch of images that are going to be used in there, and maybe fonts that are going to be used in there, and other JavaScripts that you're, so there can be a lot more than just this single HTML, but in theory, a single HTML is sufficient. This is the file that pdfToolbox is going to convert into PDF at some point. Then you have two things that pdfToolbox will generate itself. So you don't provide them. pdfToolbox creates them on the fly each time you do a preflight. The first of that is in a folder called scripts. It will write a file called params.js. That is a JSON file, and in that JSON file, you will find information about the document that was just preflighted, information about pdfToolbox itself, the version number, and so on, and information about the preflight. So this is where you find the list of preflight errors, preflight warnings, information, the fixes that were done, and so on. So pdfToolbox generates that. Because it is a JSON file, it is very easy for you to include it in your index.html, and with some JavaScript, create HTML elements to represent all of that in ultimately the PDF that is generated. That sounds very complex, but once we look at an example, you'll see how that works in practice, and it is really not that complex. And then the last bit is there is an image folder. Well, there doesn't have to be an image folder, but when you use this template, pdfToolbox is automatically going to create an image folder for you, and it is going to put some images in there if you ask for them. Yeah? This manifest.xml allows you to ask for preview images. It also allows you to ask for visualizer images, things like individual separations or an ink coverage view. And when you ask for those images, pdfToolbox is going to generate them for you in the image folder. It's also going to put some information in that params.js file for those images so that they are easy to find. Yeah. So you can use that image folder. You can put static images in there, like a logo or an icon or whatever you want to use in your report. And that is absolutely fine. It's just that pdfToolbox is also going to generate some images for you, and it's going to put them in that image folder automatically. So again, the process. First thing that you're going to do is you're going to create a template, and that template lives somewhere. It is part of the library system in pdfToolbox, so you can copy it from one library to another. And eventually, this is just a folder that lives on disk. Yeah. What pdfToolbox is going to do, it is going to preflight the file. It's going to generate all the preflight results. Once it has the preflight results, it will create a temporary copy of your template. That means wherever this template lives in the library, in the pdfToolbox library, that whole folder is going to be copied to a temporary location. Normally, it is removed after preflight, but in the manifest, you can ask pdfToolbox to retain it, to not throw it away. And this is very useful because it will show you what pdfToolbox generates in terms of information when you're testing this template. Yeah. But pdfToolbox makes a temporary copy. Why does it make a temporary copy? Well, it can't modify the template folder itself because imagine CLI of pdfToolbox, you're processing multiple files at the same time. They would all start to work in the same template folder. That is not going to function very well. So in order to overcome that, for every file that is preflighted, pdfToolbox copies that template into a temp location. Then it writes these dynamic files that I was talking about. So if you asked for images, those images are going to be added to the image folder. It will write that calls params file into the scripts folder. Yeah. And of course, it generates those files in the temporary copy of the template, not in the copy that you have in your library folder. Once that is done, it runs index.html. This is not normally the way we think about HTML files. HTML files are rendered inside of a browser, but what that means is that the browser interprets the HTML. It will run any JavaScript that it has in there. It will use the CSS to calculate where different elements go and how they will look. That is exactly what the WebKit engine in pdfToolbox does as well. Yeah. If you have written JavaScripts that modify your HTML and insert the preflight information and so on, that is the moment that that is used. The WebKit engine opens your index.html file, interprets it just as a browser would, but instead of showing it to you in Safari or Chrome, it is converted into a PDF file. It might be an HTML file there, but as you should know from other technologies in pdfToolbox as well, this engine that you have here is capable of doing things correctly in a graphic art sense. So you can create an HTML file that is set up to generate a full CMYK preflight report. It doesn't have to be RGB. You can provide all the necessary stuff so that it's PDFX compliant if you want it to be. It's also highly optimized. So where a normal browser is really, really bad at optimization in general, the output engine in this case is highly optimized to give you a PDF preflight report that is as small and as efficient as possible. Once it has run this indexed file, it's going to write it to a report PDF, and that gives you the report file. So what information can you use? Well, we already looked at some of that stuff, the dynamically generated preflight information, and that includes the calls params file with all the preflight stuff, and then some of these images that we've talked about. The preflight information that pdfToolbox generates by default during this process is not that complete. You get the basic stuff, you get the list of errors and warnings and corrections. But there is a lot more stuff that is generated during pre-flight. And in fact, probably the most complete source of information when you look at a pre-flight step is the XML report that can be generated as well. Yeah. And as part of this process in the manifest file, you can actually also ask for an XML report. If you do that, that XML report will be generated again in this temporary copy of the template that we were talking about. Yeah. And once the XML report has been written, then your HTML file is run. And so your templates can extract advanced information from that XML report and also use it to show as part of the PDF report, the pre-flight report that is going to be written. You can ask for preview images of specific pages. You have to tell pdfToolbox in the manifest.xml what resolution you want, for which pages you want them, but you can request those. You can, like I said, ask for visualizer images, and then those will end up somewhere. And you can ask for all the temporary information while you're designing this thing so that you can at least see what pdfToolbox generates, and then you can use it in JavaScript or build it into your template. So it would be good to not start from scratch. You can, there is nothing that stops you. All of this is public. You can create your own manifest file looking at the documentation and then write an HTML file and then write a JavaScript to integrate that. But it's a bit of a, that could be a bit of a problem, and it's going to take a long time. What is better is that you go to GitHub, so github.com, and Cala Software has a GitHub page, which is github.com/Cala Software. If you go there, then you'll see a few different items. There is a folder for pre-flight reports. There is a folder for place content, and so on. The one you need here is the one that is pre-flight report. So that URL should actually do it. In there, you'll see a number of example HTML templates, and the most modern ones, for which the JavaScript that you get is also the most up-to-date and modern, are examples 5, 6, and 7. And I'll show you in a second what those look like as well. They are on GitHub, free for everyone to use. You can just download them and then modify them as you need to generate the report that you want. If you find a problem in there and you want to earn some extra karma and tell us about it, then this is GitHub. So you can just submit a pull request and we'll integrate what you have in those templates. So let's take a look at this. I'm actually going to just very briefly put this on screen. This is github.com. This is what I was talking about. So Cala Software pre-flight report. You have a number of examples here. The default report template is the first one that you have there, but the ones that I would start from are 05, 06, and 07. There is some description for each of them, so you can choose the one that comes closest to what you think you need, and then from there, just modify them to do what you want. Okay, so let's go to pdfToolbox. Meanwhile, if you have questions about the theory, don't hesitate and just ask. I'm just going to show you where you can find these things in pdfToolbox so you can get started creating your own. The first thing is that, like I said, this is integrated into the library system. If I go to libraries, so here in the profile window or in the switchboard window, if I open libraries and I go to manage libraries, if you do that, you'll see a long list of stuff that is inside those libraries, and in there is a custom report template item. Yeah. So if you have libraries where you use where you've created those things, those customer reports, then they are in there. You can copy them from one library to another and so on. That is good to know. That wasn't always the case. And I think initially these things were not included in this user interface. So it was a bit hard to copy them from one library to another. But meanwhile, that is resolved. So you can actually do that. So I have a document open. I'm going to run a Preflight profile. It doesn't find any problems. That doesn't matter. What I want to do is I want to do create report. This is where you find the report generation in pdfToolbox. You have to do a Preflight, and then you have this create report button in the profile window, and that allows you to choose where to save the report, what type of report, some options for the report, and then if I choose custom Preflight report, then I can also choose which template I want to use. And so if I set this to PDF report overview, that is normally, and that might depend on your language of pdfToolbox, but that is normally how the default report template is called. And this is what it looks like. So there were no Preflight errors in this particular case, which means that all of these are set to 0 or to nothing, and you have a green check mark. There is no section with checks or fixes because there were none reported. The only thing you have here is document information and where this was preflighted. So I can see that this was version 12.3 and the version of macOS I am running. In fact, if you ever use pdfToolbox integrated into a larger solution, an OEM solution, and you want to know what version they are working with or that is integrated, running a Preflight and looking at the default report that is there is a good way of figuring out what the internal version is, because it will be listed right there. So this is the default one. You can definitely continue to use this one. It is not bad at all. It is perhaps just not as good as it could be. So we could look at modifying that a bit. So let me do that again. I'm going to go back to a document. I'm going to run analyze so that I have Preflight results, and then go to create report. Now, where do these templates live? Well, almost the only way to get there, and this is a little bit annoying. I don't know if I have anyone from Callas here actually, but I will say it again. This is a little bit annoying. Is that the only way you can get to the folder where the templates are stored is by going through the step of creating a report. And then here you can see a browse button. If I say browse, it will open the folder where those templates are stored. And if I look at where that is, you can see that it is under my preferences, pdfToolbox 12 repositories, which is the internal name for libraries. So this is called libraries in the user interface. And then custom library when it was created. So this is the unique name for it. And then you have template reports. But if you go to create report and you say browse, it will open the folder for you. And we could look at how that, well, what we have in here. Before we do that, let me show you another one. So I can say this one, for example, and I still want to generate it on my desktop. The most common error, you are going to make it, I still make it, is that you're playing with this and you forget to change this to PDF report custom, and then you get the default standard fixed PDF report. It doesn't remember the setting. Every time you do this, you have to switch it to PDF report custom. So I'm going to generate it again. You will see that this takes a little bit of time to generate. There are two reasons for that. The first reason is that, well, there are three reasons. The first one is that This technology takes a little bit longer than the built-in PDF file because you have to go through these steps of creating a copy of the template and converting HTML to PDF and so on. So that's one. The second thing is that the default templates, if you download them from GitHub, all have the setting on to save temporary information. And saving the temporary information takes some extra time as well because there is some copying going on and so on. So that's the second reason. The third reason is that Apple still hasn't come out with a new Mac with an M2 processor in it. So I'm still using something that is 5 years old. We can blame Apple for that one. Meanwhile, what you see is that this looks very different. The preflight was exactly the same. The preflight information that I get is exactly the same, but it still looks a little different. And that is because the template is very different. And you can see that the preview is a little bit bigger in this case. The other document information is squeezed nicely to the right of that. If my file would be more landscape, then that information would move to under the file. So there are some automatic layout things going on there. A lot of the information isn't there anymore. And that is because, to be honest, it's not useful for a lot of users. Yeah? Things like creation date and the modification date of the PDF file, for example, no one cares in general. So you could still add that to the template if in your workflow that makes a lot of sense. But a lot of the things that are that we thought were not useful for the majority of the users has been removed. What is new in this report is that there is a color information section where you can see color patches for all the colors in the PDF. So this is dynamic, and it generates them automatically. And it also shows, this becomes very small even on my screen, but it also shows what percentage of the file is using that color. So it gives you information about all the inks used in the document. You can see that I have a lot of pages. That is because I also have some other stuff that is built in there. There is a page with ink coverage information, and you can see page 1 in this case. And the orangey things that you see in here are areas where there is too much ink for the ink limits that I set in this pre-flight report. Okay. This is normally something that you would get in using the visualizer technology in pdfToolbox desktop. Like I said, you can get these same images during pre-flight, and you can use them in your pre-flight template if you think that makes sense. Even more to the point, I can also generate separation images. And so I don't know whether I have, yeah, so there's the last one. So I have 5 separations in this file, CMYK, and I also had a cut line. Well, these are images for each of the separations. And here I have the cut line that was used in that sticker. Again, this is not useful for every workflow. You have to see what works in a particular workflow, but we made the template rather complete so that you can download it and you can throw away the things that you don't like or don't want. Deleting stuff is always easier than putting stuff in yourself. Yeah? So it is just in there. And then the rest of the pages is the standard stuff. So here you have the original file with some annotations on top of that. That is an option. You don't have to do that, and it's no longer part of the custom report. It is just appended to the end of whatever your custom report will generate. So this is a pretty generic example of what you can do with a report like that, but there are ways to make this better. For example, I could do the same thing, and now I'm going to go back to my pre-flight results, also something that not that many people use, but you have this forward and backward button. If I have already pre-flighted this file, I can go back to the pre-flight results I had before without going through the pre-flight again. In this case, it's a very short pre-flight, so it doesn't really matter. But if you're running a huge process plan, it can be a bit of a time saver. So I go back to the same pre-flight information and I do create report again. Don't forget, set it to custom. And then I'm going to choose compact report for files showing a special separation. What would that be? Well, we'll see. I'm going to replace the one that was already created. The name that you see in pdfToolbox desktop, meanwhile, also comes from that manifest.xml file. So in the manifest.xml, there is an area where you specify how that particular template is going to show up in pdfToolbox desktop. So this is the same pre-flight information, but now you can see a few things. First of all, the background of this thing is green, which is kind of strange because normally the Callas color is red, but this template implements a feature that if there are no pre-flight errors, everything is green. The background is green here, the lines, all the icons that you have here are all green. Yeah? If there would be a pre-flight error, then the background would go back to red. So it makes it very easy to see whether there are problems during pre-flight, because you will end up with either a green pre-flight report or a red pre-flight report. The second thing that you'll see here is that, well, the information is now under the images. As I already said, if the top section becomes too big, for example, for landscape files, or here where we want to show 2 previews, then the rest of the information goes underneath. And in this case, we created a pre-flight template that lets you specify a separation name, and that separation is shown in addition to the normal preview. Yeah. This is an application for a sticker that has a cut contour. So what you get is a CMYK preview, and then you get a preview of the cut contour. You could just as well use this for something like a varnish separation or an undercolor white separation. And the template is limited to showing 2. But if, of course, if you have a workflow where you know that there is a gold and undercolor white and a cut contour and you want to show all of them, then you can modify the template and do that. What we've also done here is, while there is still an indication of the trim size, 50 by 50 millimeter, it often makes much more sense to show that right next to the preview images itself. And that's exactly what we've done here as well. So this one is 50 millimeter by 50 millimeter. And then the rest of the functionality so here is the same as what you've seen before, but we have chosen in this case to only have this one page and to not show the in coverage previews or other separation previews. Yeah. So if I would close this and I would, let me see whether this is going to work now. I made a pre-flight check document contains penguins. That should hit on this one because there is a penguin in here. Let's see. Yeah, so it found it. This is, this is a mock-up. It's not real. You can't detect penguin images in a PDF file, but I can fake it. So let me go to custom report again and use the same template. And then we're going to see if the last bit that I want to show still works. Again, this is going to take a few seconds. Yeah, so now there is a pre-flight error. Well, the second one doesn't show up here because my file doesn't contain a cut contour, so it's empty. Of course, I have a version of the a template that would simply remove the second part if you knew that sometimes you didn't have a cut contour. But what is the most important and what I wanted to show is, because I have errors in this case, document contains penguins. Because I have errors, everything is now in red. So depending on the pre-flight result, we're actually changing the color of the pre-flight report that is generated, which makes it extremely easy for a CSR or a client to see that there is an issue with this one. Yeah, you can literally have them all in a folder, skip through them and pick out the ones that are red, because you know that there will be pre-flight errors. No reading involved. Okay, this file I wanted to show one last thing with, and then we'll We can look at how this looks in Visual Studio Code if you feel very brave. And that should be it. But I just want to show this particular file with I already pre-flighted it, so I'm just going to say create report again. And I want to show you the last example, which says A4 compact report for 2-page files. So let's do that. And that is, again, a Preflight template that we've created for a special use case. And the use case here is, you know that there is not going to be a cut contour, for example, but you also know that these jobs have 2 pages. It's not just single page jobs or jobs for which you don't know how many pages you have. No. This is one that I made specifically, for example, for double-sided business cards. You know there are 2 pages, and it would make a lot more sense to show both the front and the back of the business card. There is space for that here, so that's exactly what this one does. Yeah. So instead of using this second area here for a special separation, this version of the template shows page number 1 and page number 2. The rest is identical to what happens in the other templates. I don't know what we generate. Yeah, so we also have the in coverage and the separation preview in this example. Yeah. So that's about what I wanted to show for that. The only thing I want to do to end this with is to still show you this in Visual Studio Code. And I'm not going to show all the details because that would take way too much time. But you have here this folder structure that I talked about. So each of these folders is a Preflight template. And then you have all the files I talked about. So manifest XML and index are required. Scripts is where pdfToolbox will generate this cals params.js. There already is such a file in what you will download from GitHub, but it's only an example. In real life, every time you pre-flight, it will be overwritten. And then under images, you also have this template uses some images. The dynamic images that pdfToolbox generates are not here. Okay? So how can you see what pdfToolbox generates? Well, as I said, let me see if I have some examples here. I have a whole bunch of them. As I said, I have a setting so that I can save the temporary information each time a pre-flight is done. And if I go to one of those folders are placed on my desktop automatically. If I go to one of those folders, you can see here that it generates a folder in images that is called cals pages. And in cals pages, I asked for 150 DPI images, first page. And these are the images that pdfToolbox has generated on the fly for me to use in my pre-flight report. So if you ask for images, then pdfToolbox is going to add them to the image folder, and you can use them in the image folder. Yeah. For the second page, you have a lot less. You only have a preview image. Why is that? Well, in the manifest XML, I ask for preview images for page 1 and page 2. I only ask for the visualizer images for page 1. So that's the only thing that Calas has generated. You can be pretty specific in terms of what information that you want. Yeah. How do I get that? Well, if you look in the manifests, like I said, this is the communication file between pdfToolbox and your template. What you will see at the top is something that is called display name, and display name is what your template is going to be used in pdfToolbox desktop. So if you want to rename the template in pdfToolbox, you just specify a different text here, and that is going to show up. And then in what you can download from GitHub, you will have all the stuff that you can ask for typically in that manifest XML. Again, the idea is that it makes a lot more sense, or it's a lot easier to just delete the things that you don't want than to figure out what the naming convention is if you do want them. So under settings, you can set keep temp. If that is true, then the temporary files will be kept, which is what I have it set to. If you change that to false, that is no longer the case. Of course, for production, this should be set to false, because otherwise it's going to keep generating a bunch of files that it is not going to clean up, which is a bad idea in a production environment. And then under results, there is a bunch of other stuff that you can ask for. I have XML reports, and then I can specify where to generate it. And this will cause an XML report to be generated in that folder. So if I go to my temporary folder again, and we look what happens here, then you will see that I have a folder called XML. And under there, I have an XML file that is called report.xml. And that is because I asked for that folder XML and then something named report.xml. And because I know what it is going to be called and I know where it is going to be, from JavaScript, I can get information from that XML file and use it in my template. I can ask for preview images, and then this allows me to set the resolution. So if I want to have a bigger preview, I can ask for a higher resolution preview. I can ask for specific pages to be generated, in this case, page 1 and 2. And then I have a section for visualizer where I can say, I can set all the parameters. So the ink coverage limit here was set to 250. That's the example that you've seen. But there is a lot more settings that you can set. And you can also say which visualizer parts you want. Now, these correspond to how these things are called in the CLI. So you can ask for all the different parts that you can have in the visualizer. I'm asking for ink temp, which is the ink coverage view with a temperature control view. That's the thing that goes from yellow to magenta if it's 400%. But there are a bunch of other visualizer views that you can ask for. You just add all the parts here, and pdfToolbox will give you images for it. Yeah. So this file is typically pretty standard. If you make a new template, you just decide which things you will use in your template, and everything else you throw out, because everything else will take additional time to generate. Then I have my index.html file. As you can see, this is already a little bit longer. I have a lot of information in there. You can organize this exactly the way you want, or you can just keep what we are using in here. Yeah. What I will point out is that you have, I included a bunch of style sheets, some of those in a Callas library where you have support files. Some of them, the last one is the one that gives me the styling specifically for this template. And for the JavaScript thing, that's the same. I include this cals params that allows me to access all the preflight information. I also have some of the support thing that I use. And then these are actual scripts that I use in this particular template. It's an HTML file. You can organize things the way you want. We tried to find something that makes it easy to modify. And then the rest of the HTML contains, well, the stuff that is already there. And you will see that at some stages, there is a little JavaScript that is called. Well, this JavaScript, for example, will add the preview images. pdfToolbox generates them in that image folder, but we have to make sure that the HTML has the correct images, perhaps that one of the images is hidden if it's not available, and so on. So the logic of what is done to the HTML happens in this script. And then for the rest of it, you recognize the label. So this will be the document name, number of pages, trim size. All of them are empty in here. They are filled up again by JavaScript, and that would be probably something at the end. But each of these JavaScript functions inserts information into one of these sections. Yeah. The rest of the template is, this is the styles. So this is the CSS that is used to generate that. And you can see which fonts are going to be used and that it's an A4 and so on. There is a folder with scripts, the cals params that gives me the preflight information, and then some scripts that are used by the script itself. Feel free to change, reuse, modify how you want. There is enough comments in there that you should be able to figure out what these things do. Images that are used in there, like I said, Calas will also generate stuff in there. The fonts that are used and the Calas library. This is a collection of things that I've written to make your life easier. So the scripts in there, for example, will make it so that you don't really have to understand how most of these things work. You can just look for a support function, and that should make your work in JavaScript a little bit easier in that sense. There. That's about what I wanted to explain. It is also almost exactly 1 hour. So if there are no questions, then I will be exactly in time. If you have questions, now would be a very good time to ask them. Like I said, you can unmute yourself and talk to me if you want. If you're scared of talking to me, then you can put stuff in the chat window as well. It's a lot of information to digest. I would really, really, really advise you to look at this. The amount of value that you can add by having a custom pre-flight report with only the information on it that makes sense to your clients is it has an insane amount of value. It makes a lot of sense to do this. Yeah. So look at whether that makes sense to you. There is documentation about this. There are some other YouTube movies about this that you will find in our channel. This will be added to the YouTube channel as well. And of course, if you like the idea of doing this and you think it would have a lot of value, but you can't do this yourself, we work with lots of partners who can do this for you, and we can do this for you as well. Just talk to us, tell us what you need, and we'll see who is the best partner to get you going with that. I think that's it. I think that's what I wanted to say. I don't see any questions, so either everyone is now 100% clear on how to make these reports themselves, or they all run away screaming. Both are possible, I guess. If you come up with something that you want to ask afterwards, send us an email. You can reach me at david@fourpees.com. That should work. Or you can use the support email address, support@fourpees.com. That will work as well. Just ask the question and we'll see what the best way would be to accomplish something. And that's it for today. I thank you very much for joining. This is again one of the more technical ones. I'm always happy that people stay until the end when I talk about technical stuff like this. So thank you for joining. I am absolutely certain that I'll see lots of you again on the next Four Pees Café. Go to our website, look at events. All of the cafes are listed there, and you can subscribe to them for the next month. I believe we already have them on there. So subscribe to the ones that make sense, and I will see you again next time. Have a great day.